the C-Suite Edge podcast. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the founder and CEO of Sabretooth Recruiting, and today I have Dan Goldberger, who is the New York managing partner at Dorsey and Whitney, a law firm specializing, as I take it, Dan, at least in your space, in IP, intellectual property. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having us, or having me. We certainly specialize in IP. We are a full-service law firm that does pretty much everything. So,
well, what got my attention was the IP for a number of reasons, and you and I have talked, pre-show about the tool that we're developing, from kind of putting our retingent process in the machine and all the proprietary stuff that goes into that, and the royal pain in the neck of development. But I'm hoping as we get started, you could share some background, Dan, and make sure that we get a chance to get to know you. And as we step into talking more about Dorsey Whitney and the problems you guys solve, I'd love to know the context that is coming from.
Okay. Should I answer just that question?
Go ahead.
So I am a commercial and IP litigator, which means I specialize in solving problems and resolving disputes, really with all the tools that I have, and whether that involves litigation or not litigation. We take the problems as they come and approach them in a way that's appropriate to solve the problems for the clients that we have. My background, I have been a lawyer for about 17 years now, which makes me feel way older than I think I am. But I've been doing this for a long time and have been at Dorsey for about 13 years now.
Wow.
And really happy here.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it's an interesting space. I mean, there's 3 areas of law that have always interested me. Constitutional law is one, con law. I got the opportunity to sit in on a couple of classes when I was considering law school way back in the past. Maritime, which I just find fascinating, but IP. And, a lot of people, when they look at intellectual property, they don't understand. I remember having conversations with my kids back when peer-to-peer music sharing was out. And they're grabbing this music and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, you're not going to do that anymore. Why not? And I said, well, you're not paying for it. Well, why should we? They're giving it for free. It's not theirs to give for free. They don't have the right to do that. And had to explain how this is just theft under a different venue than if you walked into a store and grabbed something. And it's interesting to me how something that basic to how our economy and society functions is something about which there's so much dispute and so many T's to cross and I's to dot. So having said that, I'm really interested in hearing, Dan, what's the biggest problem that you and Dorsey can solve for people?
Well, I would put it this way. So there's no one problem that we necessarily solve, because everyone has problems that are unique to themselves. I think certainly from my approach is making sure that I'm solving your problem and not someone else's problem. And so when it comes to problem solving, my approach usually starts with the same thing, which is what are you trying to achieve? Coming in, someone's stealing my stuff. Okay, well, do you want them to stop stealing your stuff? Do you want them to start paying for it? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And really, really understanding what they want, what the outcome that they want to achieve is. That to me is always the starting point. Because if I don't have that conversation and then I start trying to figure out, okay, how do we get them to stop, when all they really want in that example is to get paid for what's being stolen, then I'm not going to make them happy and I'm not going to solve their problem. And so some of it is, well, it's not always easy to articulate what the problem is, but really truly understanding what the problem is, what you're trying to achieve, who your adversary is, and who your client is, understanding what their needs are. Those are the building blocks to problem solving. Obviously, being creative, thinking outside the box, working for it is all of those are things you have to do. But really for me, it is what are we trying to achieve? You know where you want to end up. My job is to get you from point A to point B. And there's 4 routes we can get there. Understanding, but if I understand your objectives and what matters to you, I can help you pick the best route.
You know what's interesting in all that is you talk about routes, and that's the legal aspect of it, but so much of it is not really legal, technically speaking, right? It's getting to know someone and defining the problem, and then, okay, what are the remedies available? But you've got to define that first, and that's not necessarily, it's a professional process. I don't know that I would call it a legal process. You don't have to go to court, or you shouldn't have to go to court or file a subpoena or an affidavit to determine what someone's problem is. It has a lot of interpersonal interaction, communication, listening, I'm sure. One thing I've learned over the years in business law, and dealing with that, is just it's not like it is on TV. Everybody wants to think
nothing like it's on TV.
No, they want to go see it's Law and Order or Boston Legal, and somebody's going to shout Danny Crane and just stand there and win everything, and it just doesn't work that way.
Generally, the second-year associate does not solve the problem on the second day of the case. And I wish that it worked that way, but it usually does not. So when we're doing this, sometimes I'm a psychologist, and understanding that a lot of problems there are legal solutions for, but they might not be the best solutions. And so, yeah, suing someone is always an option, but it's not necessarily the best option. It's usually the costliest option. I can promise you that. But the ways to solve a problem involve both legal and non-legal solutions, and understanding what you're going back to, what you're trying to achieve. You'll be able to determine whether the legal route or or a non-legal route is the best one. And sometimes you have to have that fight, because it's not, otherwise you're not gonna have a problem, and we're always prepared to do that. But at the same time, that might not be the best outcome for the client. And I want to solve your problem and not necessarily try to get the most out of it from my own perspective. Lawsuits are expensive, and trying to just have as many lawsuits as possible might make me the most money in the short term, but it's certainly not going to in the long term, and I'm not necessarily going to have happy clients. And at the end of the day, I'm in the problem-solving business, and hopefully getting repeat clients to solve their problems. And not actually, that I'm wishing more people to have more problems.
But that's what I was wondering, and I'm glad you said it. I'm not, you're in the legal business, but you're really in the problem-solving and solutioning business, right? And, to your point, if somebody's talking about litigation, a lot of people don't factor in the time and the cost of that time, that loss of that resource that it takes to get to whatever the end result is. I would prefer a non-legal. I'd prefer everybody would just find a way not to say kumbaya, but at least, hey, this is reasonable. But I'm curious to know, and I know this is coming a little bit out of left field, if you looked at your job breakdown and how you interact with folks, how much of it is truly doing technical legal work versus, like you said, getting in there and understanding things from a solutioning perspective, identifying the problem, figuring it out, and you get to the point where, okay, now I can use all the stellar legal education and experience versus I have to use all my people psychology and detective experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And so I think it depends in large part on what stage, or at least for me, it's been what stage of my career am I in. When I was younger, I was more junior associate. I'm spending more time dealing with straight legal issues. Okay, the more senior lawyers that I was working for, hey, can you research this legal issue? Hey, can you write this memo? Hey, can you draft this aspect of a contract? So that stuff is, it's certainly never divorced from the other stuff, but it's more straight legal. Nowadays, as a partner and a more senior lawyer, I spend a lot of my time on the phone talking to clients and helping them work through problems. Yeah, sure, I'm always using my legal background. And there's plenty of my time that I spend reviewing stuff, dealing with just straight legal issues. But to me, the part that I enjoy the most and so I tend to gravitate more, is toward the problem-solving side, counseling, advising them around those legal problems, and then if we get there, obviously you're gonna deal with that. But going back to your point about people not necessarily understanding what a litigation entails, I can count on more than one hand the number of times that I've had clients come, like, let's go sue this guy. I love litigation. Like, I'm up for this fight. I want to have this fight. And me cautioning them, like, look, I'm obviously happy to do that, but just understand the amount of time this is going to take, the amount of time it's going to take away from running your business. The reason you're here is because you're running a business and something's and you have a problem that's impacting that business. If you taking time away from your business, obviously it costs money to fight or defend a lawsuit, and the distraction that it will become. Yeah, don't worry. I'm up for that. I'm game for that. I enjoy that stuff. 6 months later, some of them have changed their mind.
Yeah.
And so it is, but it's just a reminder that, like, these things don't end. These things do not end overnight. It is not like it is on TV. I think the longest case that I dealt with, I think it was the second case that I worked on when I got to Dorsey, and I started probably a month. Like, I started working on it a month after I got here, and that was in October of 2012. The final resolution to that case was during the summer of 2020.
Wow.
And so
basically 8 years of
yeah,
involvement.
and that involved a trial, 3 appeals, 2 of them before trial, 1 of them after trial. Following the appeal, the post-trial appeal, where both sides appealed aspects of the ruling, we ended up winning those appeals, which as a result, they filed for bankruptcy. Then we had to negotiate a resolution as part of the bankruptcy in order to get them discharged and allow them to continue running their business. And it was a partnership dispute. And it was the sole dispute was because there were 4 partners, 3 of them stopped getting along with one guy, and that led to that. And at least from a nerdy legal perspective, it all started with a poorly written operating agreement. When you have an operating agreement that says all major decisions need to be made by a supermajority in interest, and a supermajority in interest is defined as in excess of 75%, and when you have 4 guys, that means every major decision has to be unanimous. Yeah. And, that doesn't work out very well. And so, you can see all of it stemming back from that. But going back to your point about personalities and understanding that, this was all psychology. It was 4 partners who stopped getting along. And, like, how do you get along? They would have rather fought with each other than paid the other guy off, and they all would have been better off had they just settled it like a month into the case. And everyone would have been a little bit unhappy, but 8 years later.
Yet you're still a lot unhappy then. I mean, you've lost all this time. So that brings me to an interesting point. And I've heard this, when companies get started, there's usually not a lot of capital to be expended when it comes to preparing operating documents and things of that nature. But I would imagine from your perspective that the investment on the front end can have an exponential impact on the risk of the expense on, further down the road, like you saw in this particular case, where had they written it to where it was at least 2/3 majority, 67%, so if they lost a partner, maybe 66%, at least they're not frozen in gridlock. Maybe it leads to a different outcome. Maybe that one person departs, takes their toys and goes play somewhere else, and it makes for a cleaner relationship. What are your thoughts on how important that is? And let's talk about SMBs. Let's talk about mom and pop. Let's talk about the partners. Let's talk about the companies that are maybe south of 500 mil in revs at the absolute max. I've seen companies go from 0 to 150 million in a hurry. And that's a runway for a lot of trouble if you don't have the rules of the road. So what are your thoughts on that?
So you hit on a great point. We talk about this all the time. And when you're starting a business, everything's great, right? You and your partner, we got this great new idea. We're going to make so much money. This is going to go great. No one's thinking about how this can go wrong. And so that's not that's not anyone's focus. They're figuring out how can we make this work? We've got these good ideas, but how do we implement it? Sometimes, certainly, you're young and you're not thinking about governing documents. Okay, we want to do this as cheap as possible. We don't have a ton of capital. We certainly don't want to spend it on lawyers. Let's spend it on investing in the business.
Right.
And so, you can go get an operating agreement on the internet that doesn't really address your specific concerns. And so it's probably self-serving for me as a lawyer who works at a large law firm to say, yeah, you should talk to your lawyers and get as much advice as you can at this end. But so many disputes in the partnership context, which is something that I do all the time, small company, privately held company disputes. They're not thinking about that. And if they gave 10% more thought to that, they would avoid 50% of the problems that come down the road. And maybe I'm taking away business that I might have at some point in the future, but just a little bit of thought about, okay, how can this go wrong, and start not necessarily drafting for that, but just considering that and make sure that each side is protected in a situation like that. It can go a long way. And I understand why people don't want to think about that. You have a great new idea. You're really excited about it. Okay, let's talk about what it would be like if we got in a big fight and never talked to each other again. That's generally not the way people are thinking when they're
we'll never do that.
Approaching.
We're real focused on the mission.
Yeah, we're going to be fine. And so, of course, but it's a balancing act, right? You have limited capital, and how are you going to deploy that? And most people, and I think probably rightfully so, don't necessarily want to spend a ton of money on lawyers. But you get into a private equity firm investing in a business and having to draft a new operating agreement to incorporate the new partner. That's not going to be 10 pages long.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be 50 pages long, and they're going to address all of those scenarios, and it's going to be thoughtful. And are some of those overdone? Yeah, of course. But they are, in situations like that, they're really thinking about all those scenarios and drafting for that in a way that hopefully can avoid disputes down the road.
Yeah, and that's.
But at the end of the day, it's a balance.
Yeah, and it's often it's real money. You end up talking about real resources that get burned trying to correct something that could have been, if not addressed, at least mitigated against on the front end.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Dan. If someone wants to dive a little bit deeper with you, what's the best way for them to track you down and get in touch?
Find me on Dorsey's website, dorsey.com, dorsey.com. You can email me personally and reach out. Just last name, first name, goldberger.dan@dorsey.com. But if anyone wants to reach out, happy to talk to them, whether they have a problem for me to solve or not. But that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Super. And I know we're connected on LinkedIn, so if anybody listening knows me, feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to facilitate an introduction, because Dan and I have had an adventure arriving to the point of recording this podcast, and it's been fun.
We got there, though.
We got there, baby. We're there. We're at the finish line. We'll look forward to doing another one sometime. Dan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Would love to. Thank you so much for having me.